national oil companies have received a lot of support from the Chinese government and from the Chinese banks. This will last for as long as the Chinese government sees it is getting a value for its efforts. So clearly, if the national oil companies start losing money, the government may get less keen. Certainly, I know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very concerned that China's reputation will be damaged by poor behavior of China's state enterprises overseas, particularly relating to corporate social responsibility and the environment. And finally, of course, there could be changes in China's diplomatic priorities that mean in certain parts of the world it becomes less important to support its national oil companies overseas. So in conclusion then, as we said at the beginning, China's energy sector is something that affects us all. On the one hand, its absolute consumption is important for markets and for global warming, and we can see that China is struggling to improve the way it uses energy, the efficiency with which it uses energy, and the pollution that comes out of that energy. In the short term, it's made good steps, but I think an awful lot has to change within China if these improvements are to be sustained. If we look at the international activities of China's government and China's national oil companies, then clearly the last 10 years have seen a dramatic expansion of involvement of government and of companies throughout the world in 60 countries or more. I think that is there to stay. China is now a major player in the international oil and gas arena, and its companies are set to become international oil and gas companies of a sort. However, I think that we've just examined, and that we should not just assume that China's national oil companies are going to continue growing and the activities growing in this way for an unlimited period of time. And I think we also need to step back and say, of course, it's not just China's national oil companies that are active overseas, but those of Malaysia, of India, of Japan, of Brazil, and of Norway, and of other countries around the world. And so indeed China is part of a wider phenomena of the international oil arena seeing greater participation and more varied participation from national oil companies. So at that point I will stop, and I look forward to taking questions.
As we have discussed, maybe we can start from here with 2 or 3 first questions, and then we move to you, and after your answer we move ahead to Patricia. Does it sound okay for both of you?
That sounds fine.
Okay. Who wants to start? So the student will come up here and say the name and then the question.
Yes. Só fala perto aqui do microfone. Fala como se você estivesse falando.
Well, my name is Rafael Luiz Bueno da Cunha. Professor Phil, you explained in your texts.
Higher.
You explained in your texts how the Chinese government worked hard to support the international expansion of Chinese oil companies. Don't you think that the internationalization of Chinese oil companies would have taken place anyway? Do you think the internationalization process of those companies will lose momentum due to the divergence with the government spent internationally in recent times?
My name is Thiago. My question is, in order to meet China's growing demand for raw materials and primary energy, the Chinese government has been promoting partnerships with other countries. Do you think the internationalization of national companies is a necessary strategy for the government to succeed in those partnerships? If so, how serious are those divergences between the government and the companies in the long term? Knowing the experience of international oil companies such as Shell, ExxonMobil or BP, how China must still improve its international presence to guarantee the long life of those foreign ships. Is China making mistakes already learned by IOCs?
So over you.
Okay, Raphael, thank you for your first question. Would the internationalization of Chinese oil companies taken place without government support? I think it might have, but it would have been slower. I think both internally and externally they need the support of the government to get approval for all investments. They would need loans from the state banks for those investments, and obviously the diplomatic support. I think it would have happened, but it would have happened much more slowly. And the great speed in which we've seen this overseas expansion was only possible because of the huge government support. Will it lose momentum? I think to a certain extent it will have to lose momentum, because I don't think the Chinese companies can keep up the pace. They will have to focus. May the same happen in Brazil with Petrobras? I think it's unlikely, given that Petrobras is more removed from the government than CNPC and Sinopec are. I'm not sure it has the wealth that CNPC and Sinopec have. They are actually very large companies. So I think one might see a similar history, but I think it'll be much smaller and will grow at a smaller rate, because Petrobras is a smaller company and is more commercially focused, and therefore is likely to make much more careful commercial decisions before carrying out investments. To the second set of questions from Tiago, is the internationalization of national oil companies necessary for the government to succeed in the partnerships? Could the government itself build up the partnerships with the exporters of oil and gas without the national oil companies? I think probably yes, because there are not a lot of Chinese investments in the Middle East, and yet it has from the Middle East these long-term supply agreements. The supply from Angola, for example, was basically secured through a development loan. So I think if you went around the world and look at where the supplies come from and what have triggered those supplies, much of it has not been tied to the national oil companies, but through direct government involvement itself. So I would say, I haven't thought of this question so deeply before, that the answer is that the national oil companies are not critical to China government's strategy of securing supplies.